Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of We Are All Getting Played. Today is June 6th, and this is going to be kind of a combination news others miss, hospitals and the legal system part 5, and We Are All Getting Played. A quick wrap up of the first episode. We talked a little bit about why I was starting this series and how different demographics within the United States, also in other parts of the world, but especially in the United States, different demographics are being played one against the other. Within the cities, rural areas against the cities, young versus old, new left versus old left, and so forth. And we talked a little bit about the censorship industrial complex. We just hinted at it briefly, and we'll get it more in depth in a few minutes here. But I want to start off tonight by talking about an important person in my life. Talking about one of the first journalists that I ever knew. He was the uncle of my first college roommate. And I decline to give his name right now, but he was a journalist for a large Chicago newspaper. He never won a Pulitzer Prize, but he was the only journalist that I had known personally. And so throughout the years, I checked back regularly to see what he had written. He was mainly left-leaning, but he did a pretty good job of staying towards the center on many issues. And the reason I bring him up is because I want to talk. Well, remember, these are the days before the internet and before the modern tools that the deep state has for controlling public opinion. So let's get into one of the first topics that he talked about. In fact, I met him in the light of the fact that he was based in Chicago, but he was coming to Albany, and I think it was towards the end of '83, to do some follow-up to the on a story he was writing on the invasion, the U.S. invasion of Grenada. I don't know exactly how you say it, but the issue was whether or not the United States would now have very strained relationships with the United Kingdom and other countries in that area of the world, and we would have an escalation towards another kind of mini Vietnam. Now, this journalist was roughly 18, 19 years older than I am. Right now, he's about 76, approaching 77. And at the time, he was still of military age. No, I think we didn't have the draft, but he was still of a mindset that he was very much against the idea of war. And many of his friends a little bit older had gone to Vietnam. And so he was very much against this idea that the United States was being the aggressor. And so in his articles, it reflected this feeling, this sentiment of anti-war. And he maintained, for example, in Desert Storm. Well, now that we're talking about Desert Storm, let's bring up General Schwarzkopf. Let's go back one. There's General Schwarzkopf. And he was of German-American descent. And he had a very distinguished career, obviously, because that's how he managed to get 4 stars on his shoulder. But General Schwarzkopf was heavily criticized by this particular journalist. Again, it's a Chicago newspaper. During the first conflict in the Gulf, it was called Desert Storm, or at least one part of it was called Desert Storm. And I went back recently to look at General Schwarzkopf's father, who was, I had it here a second ago, Herbert Norman Schwarzkopf. General had fought in Vietnam, and he distinguished himself in service over there. And he was awarded 2 Purple Hearts in the Legion of Merit. And that is how he became, eventually by 1987, he had become I think it was a 3-star general at the time. Let's go back to his years of rank. Well, it's not, it's a moot point right now. What I want to get at here is that this journalist maintained an anti-war outlook, an anti-war sentiment in many of his articles. Desert Storm, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, at least up until around 2007. Then I lost track of his writing. But it is only recently that I discovered that it was a fake, I don't want to say a fake sentiment, but he was being manipulated. In hindsight, he was being manipulated. His editor was telling him what to leave out and what to leave in, what to emphasize, in order that the American sentiment, the American attitude towards each war would be softened. They'd say, well, it's only for a few days, it's only for a few weeks. And you remember that that in the war in Iraq, we said, well, we're going to go in there and in a couple of months it'll be all over. So this journalist that I had a certain regard for between age 20 and age 45, he had given me the impression that he was doing all he could, or his newspaper was doing all they could to pull us out of the war, when in actuality, if you read between the lines in every article, and with the advantage of having the glasses that George Webb has given me, then you can see that in actuality they are not telling the American public the truth. They are playing both ends against the middle with every article. Now let's get back to the topic of the hospitals. As you see here, I've canceled out the YouTube handle and the name of this doctor here, but we met at least once on the Harvard campus, Harvard Medical campus, and he has 500,000 subscribers on his YouTube channel. Why? How does this relate to General Schwarzkopf's story and the story of this journalist from Chicago? Well, today, a lot of the information that Americans really need to know is of a medical nature. And I want to show how the parallels between the anti-war reporting, which is actually fake anti-war, and what we're seeing today, especially in things like Facebook. This particular doctor who now works for let's put him in a fictitious hospital. Let's call it the Boylston Otis Shaw Hospital for Children and Women. Okay, that's ambiguous enough. In this hospital for children and women, this particular doctor has the function of anesthesiology. I can never say that word. Anesthesiology. He puts people to sleep before the surgery. Now, I have no doubt that he is a very good doctor. I'm sure that if I had a bad wound to my arm and I went to him and asked him to fix it up, that he'd do a very good job. What is particularly disturbing to me about the fact that he has 500,000 subscribers on his YouTube is that he is using his experience to lead people in different demographics in different directions simultaneously. It's very well done. And if you call me or send me an email, I'll give you his name and the channel. But I refrain from saying it right here because I already have 2 strikes on my own YouTube channel, and I don't want to get the 3rd strike. But this particular channel is worth watching, and I will give you the 6 most interesting, or six of the videos that I found interesting when we talk about towards decisions that are not necessarily in their own best interest, under the guise of leading you towards perfect health. Okay. Now, let's call him Thin Tony. Thin Tony is himself very charismatic, and I can personally testify to the fact that when he enters a room, everybody knows he's got more charisma than Elvis, right? So when he's giving a presentation, it's very easy to become mesmerized and to say, "Oh man, this guy's with it. He knows it all. Look at him. He's healthy. He's vibrant. He must be telling the truth." And piece by piece, he is telling the truth. Sentence by sentence, he is telling the truth. It's the conclusion that he leads you toward that is improper and maybe unethical. That's the word I was looking for, unethical. Now, why am I bringing up this particular doctor? Because what really got me about one of his videos was when he started to apologize for the Sacklers. That the Sacklers are just misunderstood. They're getting a lot of bad press, but their hearts were in the right place. And doggone it, sometimes in the course of experimenting with new drugs, you don't get it right. It's you do the 9-year process for trialing a new drug, and there are some bad side effects that just didn't come out in the trials. So please, everyone, let's give the Sacklers the benefit of the doubt, and let's stop all this bad press, right? That's one of the reasons that I do not appreciate what he's doing for the health of people in New England who come from all over the place to see him. The other thing is that he's also pushing things like Ritalin and SSRI for young people, and he's telling in half of his videos, he says most young people today have some severe trauma, severe issues that they're dealing with. Please come to our hospital and we will set you up with some mind-altering drugs. So it's very disingenuous. It's very misleading. His videos, quote unquote, promote health, but under the guise of promoting health, he's actually trying to get you to accept this idea of healthcare, going to the hospital day after day from cradle to grave. And that's what I object to. But let's go back to the censorship industrial complex for a minute. Okay, here is the father of General Schwarzkopf, is Herbert Norman Schwarzkopf. The father was responsible, I'm told, and In the course of the investigation, he worked with the newspapers. He was supposed to keep the local reporters up to date on the status of the kidnapping. He took his time. I don't know how he came to that conclusion, but he kept telling the press that the guy we're looking for is of German descent. So that's one way. Remember, I insist on reminding you that this is before the days of the internet. Now, let's jump to okay, I want to pause here for a second before we go to the next slide and talk a little bit about the human eye. One of our subscribers wrote to me and asked me why it was so important to that Wikipedia not include the photograph of certain people in their Wikipedia page. That is because the human eyeball is hardwired for human faces. The minute that we see a human face, we form all kinds of initial ideas about the person, and any information presented in that moment sticks with us. If we see a blank page or a bunch of text with no face, those words 5 minutes later they're gone. If we have a face to put with those words, they remain for hours and hours, if not weeks or months. That's why, and we talked about this last night during the Zoom call, when I saw this baseball card of Deborah Burke's, I immediately, all the things that George and the others had said about Deborah Burke's solidified. They crystallized for me upon seeing her face, right? And the same with Dr. Frank Plummer. The minute that I saw that face, I might have seen it in the past, years and years ago, but it never, until that moment, seeing the baseball card, that's when everything that I've heard about him in the news and from the alternative news and from George's reporting and Mark's reporting suddenly hit home. This is why it is so important to have the fact that the human eyeball is hardwired for faces. It's very important that we have a photograph that goes with the text. That's why they work so hard to keep Imran Awan's photo out of the newspapers, off the internet for so many months. And I think even now, 6 years after the fact, it's still very, very hard to find Imran Awan's. Okay, in the first episode, we talked about national propaganda radio, which, according to the FCC, doesn't exist. There's no station in America called National Propaganda Radio. But we said, hypothetically, if there was a program or a radio station called National Propaganda Radio, it would probably transmit a number of shows aimed at different demographics throughout the region in which it transmits. The fictitious National Propaganda Radio is based in Bujartoville, just outside of Washington, and it reaches towns like Codartoville, just to the north. But much of the programming actually comes from two fictitious towns just to the northwest of Cambridge, Massachusetts. There is a heavy involvement of 5 or 6 5-letter agencies based in that. Well, they're actually PPP, based up in not PPP. They're kind of NGOs based up in that area around Cambridge. Now, why is this important? because with the addition of Facebook and other social media, it becomes much harder to control the flow of information from person to person. Neighbors, people in a chat room exchange information rapidly with one another, and they can talk to 20, 50, or 100 people at once. So the tactics, it's no longer, they can't just print once a day. They have to have a real-time method for deflecting certain types of opinion, for making sure that critical information that could land, for example, a key player in jail, that information has to be deflected. It has to be immediately shown as just the rantings of a madman. And so the chess game, the 5D chess, becomes very, very complex. This is the job, this is where we see the development on some very sophisticated computing platforms, a program called AlphaGo. AlphaGo was developed specifically to allow these characters to play 5D chess against every demographic in North America simultaneously. Because remember, they've told, back in the 50s and 60s, they told a different lie to every demographic. Now they need to do some serious lie juggling, because all these different groups have the possibility to, in theory, to connect with each other and exchange key information. They have a mathematical model for every group. For example, here in Fulton County, Georgia, we're probably divided up into, say, 500 groups. And each group has a mathematical model identified with it. And AlphaGo determines which group, for a given set of initial conditions and a given set of possible moves. For example, I tell one candidate to flip from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. For a variety of different moves made on the same day, what gives me the outcome that I want, or the highest probability of the outcome that I want? So AlphaGo was developed by some well-meaning, PhD students. They don't know exactly what AlphaGo is supposed to do in the long term, but it's there now, and I'm convinced that it is being used by the deep state to simultaneously allow us to argue on Facebook. I mean, it is driving division. The divide and conquer game is becoming even deeper and more insidious thanks to programs like AlphaGo, plus all the other hierarchy, the other tools that they have developed over the years. For those that don't know, this is the original game of Go. That's how it's supposed to be played. I tried learning it a few years back, and the very basics are easy to learn. To become a master requires 20 years or more. All right, so why am I talking so much about AlphaGo lately? Well, I'm convinced people are making a ton of money by confusing other people, especially young people, especially in the inner cities. 2 days ago, I participated in 2 Twitter spaces, of which I don't even know how I got on them, but I found it very, very disturbing that there was zero communication. These are all, apparently they all had college degrees, and some of them might have had masters or PhDs to their name, but they were unable to communicate. They would often shout each other down. There would be 4 people talking at a time, and every single one of them had their foot pegged to the floor because there were a couple of, let's call them Brian Balls in the midst, that would always keep the conversation going back to a central argument that was very, very heated, very contentious. So this combination of Facebook and Twitter Spaces and AlphaGo that's manipulating people in real time and telling the tens of thousands of personnel on the payroll how to maneuver these groups so that there's never any consensus, that they can, not even on a single issue. In the Boston, the issue was pieces of glass, the bottle bill. How do we incentivize people to pick up glass and not throw their glass bottles on the ground, because it creates a lot of problems for dogs? You take your dog to the park, the glass gets in their paw, and it's just a disaster. How do we incentivize people to not litter pieces of glass all everywhere? Even one simple issue like that becomes close to impossible with the way that we are communicating right now on Facebook and Twitter, etc. We have literally created a Tower of Babel. Many of you have already said this, but I would add that we are this close towards a major escalation in the war on Europe and to sending people from outside Europe, the soldiers from outside Europe, including the US, into the European theater or theaters because we are unable to stop using Facebook, to turn off our cell phones, to turn off these devices, which the people at National Propaganda Radio and their shows such as wait a second, don't say anything to me, are being used to divide and conquer us like never before. Okay, I'll stop it there for tonight, and I'll pick it up again in, let's say, on Thursday night, around 9:00 p.m. Thank you, everybody, for staying in there. I'm sorry for all my pauses, but this is a difficult topic, and my mind is going a mile a minute trying to figure out where to put each of the pieces in the argument. I'll see you tomorrow for Wednesday night for the Zoom call. We have Judith Berry Baker, and then there will be another Zoom call, special Zoom call Friday night at 9. And please look for the emails, and please support us. Our Venmo account is John-Wilkins-274, and the Buy Me a Coffee, which I'm using for now, but within a month or two I'm going to stop using. The Buy Me a Coffee is buymeacoffee.com/John Wilkins, all attached. Thanks again, and I'll see you tomorrow.